Singer basically claims that we shouldn't eat meat if the process of eating meat involves causing animals to suffer, and we shouldn't eat meat if the animals that we're eating have the capacity to suffer. So his criterion for being against carnivory is the criterion of suffering. And last time we talked about other criteria, is the animal intelligent? How much is the animal like us? How close to us on the evolutionary tree is it, et cetera, et cetera. So all sorts of criteria that you could use to make this decision. His chosen criterion is this criterion of, is the animal capable of suffering? Poke feeders, I actually went online the other day and looked at poke feeders. It's nationally recognized as one of the best concentrated animal feeding operations for cattle in the country. It has received awards for this, et cetera, et cetera. And so in chapter 4, which is about the feedlot, Michael Pullen buys a cow, steer number 534, and he follows it through the food system. So he follows it and goes and visits it on the farm in South Dakota, and then he follows it to poke feeders and goes and visits it at poke feeders, and he describes in some detail his visit to poke feeders. So he's essentially following this one head of cattle through the industrial food chain that produces meat for us. When he gets to poke feeders, he says poke feeders has 37,000 cows. And so if you go on Google Earth, you can see over time, if you turn on the timeline here, that poke feeders has changed. So this is poke feeders today. And if we go back in time, we will see that poke feeders has, that is back in time somewhat. This is poke feeders today. This is poke feeders in 2015, so it's added a little since 2015. This is poke feeders back in 2014, 2013, 2012. All those paddocks on the right were not there. When did Pullen write this book? 2006. 2006. So let's see if we can go all the way back to 2006. Oh, there's poke feeders in 2007. But given that this wasn't published until 2006, it was probably actually written back in 2005. So basically, all that stuff down at the bottom was not a part of poke feeders. So this is poke feeders 2004. Let's see if we can get 2005. It hasn't changed much from 2004 to 2005. So back then, there were 37,000 cows crammed into this space. I did my measurements on poke feeders now. So my measurements on poke feeders now actually includes all of this area that used to just be agricultural land. So our estimates are going to be conservative on the we're being nice to animals side. Because obviously poke feeders can support many more cattle now because it has more land, and we're calculating. Well, actually, we could just redo the calculations, I guess. Let's see if we can do this. Let's see. Can we do this? Can we do this? Oh, yeah, we can. We can do this. I've done this before. Let me do this. Oh yeah, we can do this pretty easily. Let's recalculate. So we'll do this in the best way possible. We'll evaluate poke feeders at 2005 stocks for 2005 numbers. That way we can have the most realistic sort of answer to our question of, do we want our cows grown this way? Whoa, no. Through the magic of modern mapping. Okay, so now we can see if that updated the size of the place. Did it update the size? Oh, it did update the size. So here's Poke Feeders as it was in 2005, mostly made up of these paddocks where the cows are. I have sectioned out ponds where organic material is stored, wastewater is stored. I've also excluded the area where all the feed is being processed. So we can zoom in on Poke Feeders and see everything that is there. Nope, I did not want to do that. Let me get out of that. So there's Poke Feeders as it was in 2005. And at that point in time, according to measurements on Google Earth, Poke Feeders constituted 9,390,057 square feet. 9,390,057 feet square. So we use a little thing that we use in science a lot. We use it especially in chemistry called the factor label method. It's a method that allows you to make conversions between units quickly and easily. So if we have 37,000 cows at Poke Feeders, one Poke Feeder is equal to 9,390,057 square feet. The reason we might want to have it in fair square feet is because we live in living spaces that are designed by or measured by square footage. So if we do the math here, which now I have to do all my calculations over because I did them according to different dimensions, 37,000 divided by 9,390,000 57 square feet. Is that right? Yep, 9,390,000. So that's 3.94 times 10 to the minus thirds. That means go 1, 2, 3. So that basically equals out to 3/1000ths of a cow per foot squared. Okay, so my question to you, does that really have any meaning to you at all? How can we make this number more meaningful? It's an exercise in thinking about numbers.
To make the area more than a foot squared.
Okay, so we can make that more than a foot squared. What else could we do? For example, we could, instead of saying that this is a foot squared, we could say, okay, Paul's house. Paul's house is 1,200 feet squared. So we can make the conversion where we say, well, 1,200 feet squared is my house. And so multiply that times 1,200, and that would tell you how many cows would be capable of living in my house if my house were housing cows. And right now my house houses me and Elizabeth and Gus, our Madagascar big gecko, Oscar, our bearded dragon, Spike, our corn snake, and Misty, the cat. These are the inhabitants of Paul's house. But what's another way that we can think about this? We will scale it up to my house.
What about the size of Noah's room?
Okay, we could scale it up to the size of Noah's room. What else could we scale it to? Is it easy to think of a cow in Noah's room?
Yeah.
Sure.
Really?
Yeah.
I find it way easier to think of Noah in Noah's room. So we could actually ask ourselves, if we can fit 3/10,000ths of a cow in this square foot, we could ask ourselves how many people fit in that space. Oh, I asked you to figure out what the other thing I asked you to do was calculate what the average weight of human beings is in the United States. Did you guys go do that?
Wait, but doesn't that differ? Are you saying like guy and girl are together?
Okay, so consider
Is there
we're basically 49% male, 51% female, so you can basically just say that's 50-50 ratio.
Okay.
And what's the average weight of males in the United States?
195.7 pounds.
It's a whopping 196 pounds. This is the average weight for men in the United States.
According to medicalnewstoday.com.
Actually, they got that number from the Centers for Disease Control, which would be a more reputable site. And if you look at Centers for Disease Control, it's virtually the same. What is it for females?
170.6.
170.6. We'll just call that 171.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean,
Is that adults?
Huh?
Is that it?
That's
Is that
adults.
just
That's
adults?
adults. Yeah, no fair doing this on children because they aren't finished growing yet. So that's 7. That's 16. That's 367. 367 divided by 2. That's 1. You have 2 left over. 1 left over. That's 16. That's 180. That's 16 and 7. 183.5. So average. Let's just say that average weight of humans here is 184 pounds. So we could basically say, okay, well, one cow, harvesting weight for a cow is 1,200 pounds, and 184 pounds basically equals one average human. And we've basically converted the number of cows at Poke Feeders to an equivalent value looking at the number of people per square feet. So we would take that number there, multiply it times 1,200, and that gives us 4.73 divided by 184 pounds. And the way this works is Poke Feeders cancels out, cows cancel out, pounds cancel out, feet squared don't cancel out, so this is the number of people per foot squared. So if we do 4.73 divided by 184, that basically tells us that we have 200ths. 0.257 people per foot squared. But once again, this isn't terribly useful because none of us live in a foot squared. We live in spaces bigger than that. So let's just say, well, how many people would be in my house if my house were stocked at the same rate that Poke Feeders is? So to do that conversion, there are 1,200 square feet in my house. And so we would take that number that is up there and we would multiply that times 1,200. And we would conclude that 30 average humans would occupy my house. My house, 30.8, so really let's just round this up to 31 essentially. 30.8. My house is the third smallest house in the historic district in Liberty. There are 2 little tiny houses, and then there's my house, which is kind of a normal sized house, but very much on the small side. If you want to see my house, it's at 408 West Kansas. street, drive by, and look at that house and ask yourself, would you want to live in that house if there were 30 people in it? We could do this for Noah's room. Take these 0.0257 people per foot squared. We can multiply it times the 132 square feet. And get an equivalency for dorm room capacity.
3.39.
What?
3.39.
3.39. Would you want to live in your dorm room with 2 1/3 other people? You share your room with someone right now?
One.
Yeah. How's that?
It's perfect.
Is it perfect?
Right where it needs to be.
What's that?
It's right where it needs to be.
Right where it needs to be. You wouldn't want to pack another third person in there. Now, what's different between your dorm room and Pokey Feeders and my house and Pokey Feeders?
Your house has a kitchen.
My house has a kitchen. I've excluded Pokey Feeders' kitchen. This is essentially Pokey Feeders' kitchen. What other differences are there?
Bed.
Well, they have a bed. It's dirt. It's really poop is what it
You
is.
don't have, like those ponds.
Hmm?
You don't have the ponds in your house.
I didn't measure ponds.
You didn't?
Nope. What are those ponds holding?
Drinking water?
No, you would not.
Gross.
You would not want to. It's basically like poop water, poop and pee water. Those are settling ponds for the sewage that is generated by those cows. Where do those cows go to the bathroom?
Where they are.
Where they are. So this is assuming that rather than having a bathroom down the hall, which is I assume where your bathroom is,
Yeah.
there's a common bathroom down the hall. Instead of going down the hall, the 3.3 people in your room
Poop where they are.
poop and pee right where you are.
I'd be so mad.
You would be so mad.
I'd be so mad.
And once every couple of days, they come through with a shovel and they'll shovel all that stuff out and remove it, but then for the next couple of days, you're pooping and peeing in your own dorm room. I wouldn't want that with 31 people in my house.
That'd be horrible.
That would be horrible, wouldn't it? So these are the rates at which cows are stocked at Pokey Feeders, and when they're stocked at Pokey Feeders, you know, they're pooping and peeing in the place where they also sleep. You guys know what the housing and urban development recommendation is for living space for humans?
No, I just had,
What? Go ahead.
my dad thinks he's real funny, and our neighbors have a lot of kids.
Uh-huh.
12 kids in a pretty small house.
Mm.
And so he called the city on them to see what the number of people who live in one house.
It's different for if they're people that you're related to versus people that you're not related to, as it turns out.
Really?
Housing and urban development recommends 165 feet squared per person. So we could ask ourselves, okay, for this equivalency, we have 30.8 people per 1,200 feet squared. We would do the same calculation on Noah's room. It would give us the same answer because these are all equivalent measures. 1,200 divided by 30.8 equals, no, that's not right. That's 38.96 feet squared per person, which is not at all similar to 165 feet squared per person. So basically we're stocking cows at Pokey Feeders at about 4 times the rate that we would find suitable for, is that right? No, I'm wrong there. Oh yeah, I was close. 4.2 times the recommended rate for humans in essentially public housing. And you might say to yourself, well, they're cows, we don't have to treat them the same way as humans. But my question is, what is the limit? What is the limit, Noah, on what you would want in your room in terms of people in order to give you a suffer-free life?
Less than that, I would say.
Less than 3.39?
Yeah.
Right.
So that 165, what is that number?
It's the number of square feet per person that the Housing and Urban Development
So
recommends.
we're living in dorm rooms with a roommate. We're actually living.
But this is in single-family housing units where the assumption is that you have a bedroom, a kitchen area, a living space, and a bathroom. And so that encompasses all of that. We can stock you as cattle at higher rates per square footage because you have kitchen facilities that are not in your dorm room. You have bathroom facilities that are not part of that living space, et cetera, et cetera. So these multi-unit housing things, like dormitories, where the living space that you have really is just the space that you have a desk for doing homework and a bed, standards for that are different. Because you don't have a bathroom, you don't have a kitchen, you don't have a living area per se. So that's the reason for the disparity. Yes, you could, don't go to student housing and say, we deserve more space, because they're gonna say, well, housing and urban development, that number doesn't really apply to your situation. But this would be like if you were building a public project, housing unit in a city somewhere, these would be the recommendations that you have to have fewer people than you could potentially have it in an effort to keep it below this level. You need to have at least 165 square feet per person. And so when your father calls the housing people, they will go and investigate. They will ask if the people there are related or not, because this value once again also goes down if you're in a single family dwelling versus if you have multiple unrelated people living there.
Yeah, they pretty much told them to F off.
Oh, you told your dad to F off? Yeah. Housing authorities really don't like getting involved in those kinds of situations, but there is some federal guidelines as to what's kind of acceptable. If you are managing a housing unit, if you're managing an apartment, if you're managing federal housing and things like this, these are the recommendations that you have to follow. So when we think about suffering, you have to ask yourself, would I be suffering if there were 30.8 people living in my house? And quite frankly, when family members come over to visit, not that they come over very often, that's trying, because you're once again cramming more people into space that you're normally not familiar with that number of people living in that space. But I certainly wouldn't want 30 people living in there, 31 people, so that would be 29 other people living in my house. It's not that big of a house. Now I could push some of them down into the spidery basement, which is not included in the square footage of my house, and alleviate some of the stress. But yeah, it would get bad really, really quickly with that many people in my small house. It would be even worse if we didn't have 1.5 bathrooms and we just pooped and peed kind of wherever we were at the moment. Riley.
What is the same number for the other farm, the Polyfuse farm, for the cows?
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. How many head of cattle does he graze? I think it's going to be a little harder to figure out. And the reason is that I think the only numbers that are in here for Polyface Farm is yearly production. And yearly production doesn't necessarily mean the number of cattle that you have on the land at any given moment. So let's see if we can find that out. That's actually an excellent question.
I think the productivity said 50 beef cattle.
50 beef cattle. So we could do the same thing. That's excellent. Let's remind ourselves of the dimensions of the farm.
50 pastures.
450 pasture, is that what it was?
No, 150.
Pardon?
150.
150. Oh, 450 is forest, isn't it?
400 is forest, yeah.
150 acres. Okay, so this is going to be trickier. Let's go and look up the conversion of acres to square feet. Who wants to run the numbers on this? Oh, did you find it?
Yeah, I just have the conversion.
1 acre.
It's 43,560 feet. 43,000.
43,560 square feet?
Yeah.
Feet squared, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody come up here and do the same, apply the factor label method. Okay.
So we're square there.
So the first thing you want to do is divide.
Do we want to get it into people?
Yeah, so just, yeah, I sometimes do it in segments, so just do this first segment where you can get the number of beeves per square feet, which is what we had here, cows per
Yeah.
square feet. Yep. Just follow the same method I used.
So 50 beef, that's just 50.
Carry the
cattle.
beef over. So 50.
Yeah, so it'll be
50 divided by 150 divided by 43,000. Oh, but you don't copy those, you have to use these numbers now.
okay.
So you have to actually do some math.
That sucks.
You need a calculator.
50 divided by 150 divided by 43,560 equals, 7.65 times 10 to the minus 6 equals
That's a lot of zeros.
7.65 times 10 to the minus 5th. What you do when you have a minus 5th, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's where the decimal is now. So it's 0.000765 cows per
Square foot.
square foot. So now you have cows per square feet, and you can already see, comparing this number to that number, it's substantially different. Okay, but go ahead and run it out. How many people would live in my house if they were stocked at the same level as Polyface Farm is? Here is so now you have to start doing all these conversions. Go to town.
Do you want to put these conversions still down here?
Yeah, write them down. So cows are still 1,200 pounds at harvest. People are still 184 pounds, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to be keeping track. So now cows cancel. Cows
And
cancel.
then we'll go to
And so now we have pounds per square feet. Per one average human, and that should give us people per square feet, but then we actually want people per my house. So, well, you can continue doing it, just do another thing there, and then we basically want to convert 1,200 square feet into a standard human's house. So this is squared, 1,200 feet squared, because we're canceling out feet squared.
Yeah.
1,200 feet squared for Paul's house. And that'll give us feet squared cancel out, and that will give us humans per house. So then multiply everything in the numerator and divide by everything in the denominator. that right?
That's what I got.
0.000765 times 1200 times 1200
Mhm.
divided by 184.
That's what I did, I think. Do it again. 0.0000765 times 1200 times 1200 gives me 110 divided by 184.
That's looking better. A half a cow per house?
Yeah.
Joel Salatin's cows are living better than I am. Okay, so what we basically just went through is an exercise in critical thinking. Why is it an exercise in critical thinking?
Because you had to imagine cows in a house.
So you're asked to evaluate, how do I feel about 37,000 cows at Pokey Feeders? Is that a terrible thing? Is that an awesome thing? Is that a neutral thing? It's difficult for you to address those kinds of questions. What's the size of the federal debt? Caden's looking it up.
Some trillion.
It's trillions of dollars. It's trillions of dollars.
Trillions of dollars. What does that mean to you?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Why?
Because it's just gonna keep growing and no one doing shit because the government's stupid, so.
It's such a large number, it's difficult for you to contemplate.
Trying to stop caring, so it's like, all right.
Can you contemplate what it would be like to have $100,000?
I can't even contemplate what it's like to have $1,000.
You can't even contemplate what it would be like to have $1,000. So if you can't contemplate what $1,000 is, you can't contemplate what $22 trillion is. It's just a number that is so large that you can't even comprehend it. In the same way that you can't comprehend what it means to have 37,000 cows on a plot of land. But what can you envision? Because you deal with it every day. I can think of it in terms of how many people I want to pack into my house. You can think of it in terms of how many people you would want to pack into your dorm room. Those then become real numbers to you because it's something that you can relate to. And so the act of dealing with large numbers in a world where we're confronted with large numbers all the time is to break it down to some measure that is relatable to you. I'm actually surprised at the Joel Salatin numbers, because that's a really low density of cows on a plot of land. That's really low density. Like literally those cows are living better than I am, which is sad. So you can't productively think about this value unless you put it into some context that helps you think about it in real world terms. In chapter 4, he says 37,000 cattle at Pokey Feeders. He says it smells terrible. He looks at cow 534. Cow doesn't look like he's in great shape. He looks sad according to Polhund's description of him. I don't know what a cow's face looks like when it's sad versus when it's happy. But you don't actually need his emotional assessment of the state of that cow. You can ask yourself, well, what does this mean in terms that I can wrap my head around? Once you have it in terms that you can wrap your head around, you can ask yourself, is that how I think cows should be raised? Should cows be raised at the equivalent of 31 people per house in a 1,200 square foot house, which is a small house. The average, you know what the average house size is now in the United States? 2,500. Very good. You've been following the housing market. 2,500 square feet. You know what the average family size is?
42.
2 parents and
42
like
people.
1.3 children.
Oh, no, I thought you meant
What's that? You know what it was in the 1950s?
A lot.
It was 1,250 square feet, spread across how many people?
6.
8.
5, 2 parents and 3 kids, on average. Houses have gotten bigger and families have gotten smaller. And so by 1950 standards, you still wouldn't want 31 people in your house without a bathroom. So when we think about Peter Singer's argument that suffering is the criterion, stocking cattle at this rate, do you suspect that those cattle are happy, or do you suspect that Michael Pollan is accurate in his impression of steer 534 and that cow is sad?
I would be sad.
You would be sad.
Yeah.
So you would think that if a cow was capable of feeling sadness, which I imagine a cow probably can, that it would probably be sad also. And so then you can say, well, if that's the way I would feel, and you can imagine that cows have feelings, which I don't know that cows do have feelings, but I'm pretty sure that they can feel pain and discomfort. You have to ask yourself, how do you now feel about eating that steak? Knowing that that steak was raised in a facility that at best has the standards of animal welfare that Pokey Feeders has, and it has earned awards. It has literally earned awards for animal welfare, or something less than Pokey Feeders. And I'm not saying eat beef or don't eat beef, I'm just saying that there are productive ways of placing stocking rates at concentrated animal feeding operations in a context where you can at least start to make some informed decisions about that. And you do this by employing the factor label method, which is very useful for making conversions among different units so that you can convert something into a unit that is useful to you. We did it starting with Pokey Feeders, and luckily Pokey Feeders, we can easily calculate what the square footage of Pokey Feeders is using Google Earth, but you can easily convert acres to square feet by just looking up a conversion and then knowing how to put it in a way. You operate factor label method by putting things in the denominator and the numerator such that they cancel out across the whole set of conversions that you're using. So chapter 4 in Pollan's book deals with conditions at Pokey Feeders. Chapter 17 in Pollan's book deals with the ethics of eating meat. What do you think Peter Singer would say about Pokey Feeders? He would say that that's not a happy place. We should not be raising cattle that way. If the sole purpose of that facility is to create food for humans, Singer would say we should not do that. Yeah. Okay.
Then with the amount of beef that we as humans consume, what would be a better way of raising cattle and enough to produce?
The International Panel on Climate Change would say stop raising cattle for food.
That's enough for me, Chief.
I mean, that's what the International Panel for Climate Change would say, and that's what Peter Singer would say. Peter Singer would say, if this is what you have to do to get meat, he would say stop eating meat. That's kind of his point. That's kind of his shtick, right? Like, he is an animal rights activist who is against people eating meat. His conclusion would be, if this is what you have to do to raise cattle, then you should stop eating cattle. Now, my guess is Peter Singer's probably also never run the numbers on Joel Salatin's farm. He may very well say, well, Salatin's cattle are pretty happy. They're living better than some humans live. College professors at small liberal arts colleges in the Midwest, maybe that would be an appropriate condition to raise meat in if you're going to raise meat for consumption. But to raise meat Salatin's way for consumption, if we expect to feed every beef eater in the United States, we would need a lot of land devoted to raising beef.
We can't, because all we keep doing is building and building and building and taking away more land.
Well, we've already converted huge swaths of the American landscape to agriculture to begin with. So no, it's a valid question. If we don't raise meat this way, how do we raise meat? And from an environmental standpoint, the International Panel on Climate Change would say, well, the thing to do is to stop eating so much meat, and then we don't have to go about raising meat in this way. I was looking at Facebook.
Well, here's the thing though, if you do that, there's so many other different things are gonna change too. You're gonna cut down a lot of jobs, say, in all the fast food places that use beef, like McDonald's and all that.
Oh
that
yeah.
shut
Oh,
down.
sad.
So it's
McDonald's is gonna suffer a profit hit.
Yeah, profit.
It's
It's
taking
they're gonna have to
jobs
close
away.
down a lot more places, and it cuts down a shit ton of jobs. And it's like,
Sure.
I mean, what would you raise up more, jobs and people, or food? So like,
Okay, so don't get angry at
no,
me.
no, I'm not trying to. I'm not saying, but like, I like
He's got some
beef.
reservations
I need
on that
steak.
topic, man.
I like
Caden
burgers.
has objections.
Yeah.
So the IPCC would basically say what you have to do is you have to balance long-term consequences versus short-term consequences. And so one of the problems with doing anything about anything is basically as soon as you suggest that something needs to be done differently, the first thing people say is, well, what about jobs and putting people out of jobs and higher unemployment, et cetera. So what I would say to you is that, yeah, there are going to be losses in some segments of the economy. Fast food, so for one thing, it's never gonna happen. But if it did,
I know. Well,
if it did, and people took on a more vegetarian sort of lifestyle, they cut back on the amount of meat that they consume, which is quite frankly what your doctor would tell you to do from a health perspective anyway. So if we started following the advice of our medical doctors, who presumably know something about health, we would eat less meat. That would certainly put some types of farmers out of business. But in the same way that food is has an inelastic demand curve from an economic standpoint and thinking about price, it also has an inelastic demand curve in terms of thinking about demand. Demand for food isn't going to change. What you're talking about is restructuring the marketplace for the kind of food that's being grown.
Yeah, but you can't force people to change their diets, like in
No,
that kind of way.
no.
And you're turning into kind of like a Wall-E kind of.
What?
Like, you know, Wall-E, like they totally changed the way that they eat their food. I don't know, that's just
Yeah,
fantastic.
So yes, diets, you can't impose dietary restrictions on a populace of free-thinking Americans.
Yes.
You're never going to do that. Would you argue that diets are the same now as they were 100 years ago?
No.
No, they're not. So diets can change. Takes time for diets to change. But diets change naturally. One of the things that influences how diets change is what's available. What do you think people were eating 100 years ago that's different from now?
Way more things,
They were probably eating way more plants. Why?
because agriculture was bigger than it is today.
Well, more people were involved in the process of agriculture. 100 years ago, did we have federal price supports for things like corn and soybeans?
No.
No, we didn't. What makes cattle ranching a viable option in terms of profitability?
Because you don't need as much space nowadays.
You don't need as much space nowadays because you graze them for 6 months on pasture and then you send them off to a concentrated animal feeding operation for 6 months. In a year, you have experienced a return on the investment of having those cattle in the first place. But that concentrated animal feeding operation is largely dependent upon federally subsidized grain and soybean crops. So I would argue that one of the ways in which diet in America has changed over the last 100 years, and go back and review the section that we just finished on history, is because the way that agriculture gets funded by the federal government has changed drastically in the last 100 years. And it's changed in a way that has gone from having a diversity of crops on farms to having a lack of diversity of crops on farms. It has changed in terms of the amount of fruits and vegetables that we eat, to the amount of meat that we eat. All these things that are in that that USDA report that we went through at the beginning of the history section, these are all changes that have happened to the American farm that have influenced the American diet. So I'm not saying that you can impose, all Americans should eat this many servings. They're recommendations. That's why they're called dietary recommendations, not requirements. But I would argue that that slow shift in the American diet has happened as a result of this slow shift in agricultural practice.
True, but you can't necessarily go back. Obviously, people are eating healthier back then because things weren't processed and a whole bunch of shit like that.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what would you do to, like, you can't go back to those days though. Like,
Sure
with
you
how
can.
much? Well, no, with how much that's been built and everything, the amount of cities and towns and amount of land that's been processed for growth.
Let me share a story with you. I used to do work in Puerto Rico, and in 2007, there was a series of droughts in the Midwest. The droughts led to decline in agricultural productivity. The supply of corn went way down, and this was the year that they started making mandatory fuel requirements for mixing ethanol into fuel. And so facing declining corn crops, and as a result, increasing prices for ethanol, the price of gas went way up. And when I left for Puerto Rico at the beginning of the summer, this hadn't yet started, and I think gas was down around $1.75 a gallon or something like that. When I came back at the end of the summer, it was close to $3 a gallon here in Kansas City. And what I noticed on the way to the airport when I was leaving for Puerto Rico is what I notice all the time, which is people cruising along I-70 on the way to the airport where the speed limit is 70 and they were doing 80 to 85. Guess what I noticed when I came back and was driving home from the airport? People doing 70. Why?
Gas shut up. And
Gas prices shot up. You get lower gas mileage when you're driving over the speed limit than at the speed limit or below the speed limit, and that difference in price affected behavior. This is well known in economic circles. You should know this from studying business. As price goes, that affects consumer behavior. If we didn't subsidize grains and beans, that is primarily the things that go into feedstocks that are served to cattle at concentrated animal feeding operations, what would happen to the cost of those feeds if we didn't subsidize them at the rate that we currently subsidize them? Those feedstocks would become more expensive because the price incentive, the way we fund it, encourages farmers to produce a lot, which drives down cost. That drives down the price because you have way more supply than demand can absorb. So you would have, rather than an oversupply of corn and soybeans, you would have lower supplies of corn and soybeans. The prices of feedstocks would go up. When the price of feedstocks go up, what will happen to the price of beef and pigs and chickens and everybody else? That will go up. When the price of one food item goes up, what do people invariably do?
Try to eat something different.
They don't buy it. They go and buy something different. They don't stop eating because food prices are expensive. They shift to food that is less expensive. And so by removing agricultural subsidies, you would raise the price of beef. You would still have beef being produced, and those people who could afford it or wanted it on special occasions and things like this would still buy it. But you would actually have a decline in consumption because of an increase in price. And as a result of that, people would shift their eating habits to eating something else. And so if you're not eating beef, well, what else are you going to be eating? You're going to be eating more vegetable matter. Now, maybe that vegetable matter is all in the form of cornflakes and frosted flakes and corn shacks, but you're eating something different. You're eating lower on the food chain, which ultimately is better for the environment. It's certainly better for cows. If you took all of that subsidy money away from corn and soybeans, what could you put that subsidy money into? Fruits and vegetables. In that case, the price of fruits and vegetables would go down while the price of meats of various types would go up. And there would now be an economic incentive for the consumer to actually buy more fruits and vegetables. And chances are, if that's the only thing sitting in their refrigerator, they're gonna eat that because, once again, there's an inelastic demand curve for food. You have to eat something. So, can you legislate what people eat? No, but you can create economic systems that influence what we eat and how we eat. And I would say that economic systems have been doing that for the last 100 years. We just haven't really thought about it from the standpoint of human nutrition. We've thought about it strictly from the standpoint of what is this going to mean for farmers? We've taken the Caden approach. What is this going to mean for farmers? Well, what it means for farmers is that there are going to probably be some beef cattle farmers who get out of beef cattle farming and go into some other kind of farming.
No, I'm not talking
Because
about.
that's where the market is.
I was talking about like those kind of jobs. We're talking about like the guys in fast food restaurants who rely on those meats.
Once again, if
Yeah, it might be short term, but then again, it's like some of the only jobs that people.
what makes McDonald's profitable?
So cheap.
So cheap.
It's cheap. Why is it cheap?
Yeah.
Because the food's cheap. What is the kind of food that they serve there?
Hamburgers.
Hamburgers, meat. Hamburgers, chicken, potatoes. Once again, if you change the subsidy system, the prices of those things would go up. Those jobs would still be there, but those products would be more expensive. What would happen then is rather than going to McDonald's, where now your Happy Meal instead, what is the price of a Happy Meal now? Rather than a meal with a burger, fries, and a soda being $3, a burger, fries, and a soda would be $7. Well, if you're at $7 price point for fast food, then maybe you decide to not go to a fast food place and you go to a local establishment where you, for $7, you can actually get some pretty good street tacos, and for a couple of bucks more, you can get a really good margarita. And so once again, sure, there would be some places that would be hurt, but just as in any economy, while some places may decline, what that probably means is it's going to be good for other kinds of establishments that are in that same sector of the economy. Now, would it make up for it totally? Probably not. But one of the things about fruit and vegetable farming requires a lot more hands than large mechanized commodity farming does. One farmer can basically work 1,500 acres with just him. And the scaling up from 1,500 acres to 15,000 acres doesn't require more than adding maybe one or two more people to your operation. And so you could take those people that are working in McDonald's and put them to work on fruit and vegetable farms. Keep in mind, Caden, this is never going to happen.
So what would you what would be a better alternative that would actually be considered that could actually work, but that people would actually listen to, be open to change?
Well, I don't think there is an alternative. I think people don't care about the plight of animals in concentrated animal feeding operations.
No.
I don't think people really care about their health in any meaningful ways, except when they get sick and they're bummed that they're sick about it.
Yeah.
I don't think people really care about the climate consequences of doing agriculture the way that we do agriculture. I don't think people really care about the fate of their grandchildren. I don't think people give a damn about what kind of world their grandchildren live in. I think if any of us cared about any of these things in any significant way, we'd probably do things different. And we're clearly not doing things different. So I think there are alternatives, but the problem with alternatives is alternatives only matter if you're willing to walk towards those alternatives.
We're trying to grow meat now in the labs.
Oh my gosh, they're trying to grow meat in labs, which removes the animal cruelty aspect. You could then eat meat without suffering Singer's argument about suffering, because there's no way that meat grown in a lab is causing suffering to anybody except maybe the consumer. So, but once again, what's the cost of doing that? The cost of doing that is it's probably way more expensive to do that, probably requires way more inputs of things like fossil fuels to do that, probably creates lots more toxic waste as a result of doing that than even something like a concentrated animal feeding operation, because you're growing this stuff totally devoid of any sort of natural inputs. So all the inputs are going to be synthetic, all the outputs are going to be synthetic, and once again, I don't know that that's necessarily a viable long-term option. It gets you out of the Peter Singer thing about animal suffering, but it doesn't get you out of all of these other consequences. And it's probably more expensive because it requires more synthetic kinds of inputs. And it's also extremely rare. And it is
Right
well.
now.
Right now, yeah. So costs may come down as you get better at producing it and things like that, but I don't know that it's a solution for larger issues.
So do you think that cattle farming is like one of the biggest reasons, like one to help change the climate and everything like that? Even though it's, I just saw it, I don't know if it's true, but it's like only accounts for necessarily 2% of like those gases.
Yeah, so I think so you have to factor in not only emissions produced by the cattle operations themselves, but then you also have to factor in all the fossil fuels that go into generating synthetic fertilizers, which is pretty heavily involved in. It takes a lot of fossil fuel to split nitrogen and make synthetic nitrogen, put as fertilizer on the fields that grow the corn and the soybeans to put into the feedstocks. So that number is going to vary quite a lot depending upon how much of the indirect effects you're including in that. No, there are way other things, way better things that we could do environmentally in terms of slowing down climate change. Getting away from burning fossil fuels, it would be a huge thing. But once again, people are like, but what about the coal miners? Well, we saw at the beginning of class, coal mining jobs have been declining in the United States for decades.
Yeah, that's true.
Mainly because we've shifted to using things like natural gas. And then people are like, well, if we shift away from fossil fuels altogether, we end up putting all these fossil fuel industry people out of jobs. But as you get away from fossil fuels, you're going to be bringing online more solar, more wind, et cetera, et cetera. You know what one of the best jobs you can get without a college degree? Right now, actually, some colleges and universities have started academic programs in this to train people because power companies can't get enough of these people.
Like wind farms.
Yeah, people who go out and do maintenance on wind farms.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, they literally get thousands of dollars just to go up on these propellers and go fix something.
Yeah, you know why?
Yeah.
That's super dangerous.
It's
'Cause they don't-
dangerous as hell.
Well, you have to have a certain. You can't be scared of heights, and you can't be wigged out by closed spaces. But then you also have to know something about electrical engineering
Yeah.
to work on them. And the thing of it is that there aren't nearly enough people to supply the jobs that are out there available for those people. So those people get premium wages because they're in low supply and there's a really high demand. So yeah, people will be put out of business if we shift away from fossil fuels. And those people who are in fossil fuel industries can go and find jobs in renewable energy because those jobs are out there and waiting for people to take them. The problem is that government has sucked on this front. So as coal jobs have been declining, not because the government has done anything, but just because of shifts in the mix of fossil fuels that people use, because natural gas is so much cheaper than coal is because it's one of the byproducts of fracking operations. As those coal communities have withered up and died, people have just let that happen. Rather than going into those communities and saying, hey, your industry is declining, we need to retrain you to do something differently. Well, you know what you can do? You can go get a job still in the energy sector. It involves making repairs to solar farms, making repairs to wind farms. Those are really good paying jobs. They probably pay better than your coal job does at this particular time because those jobs are in high demand. And you're anti-government stepping in and doing things, but this is a place where government could have stepped in and said, hey, coal jobs are disappearing because of market forces. We're going to set up a retraining program for coal miners that will retrain them to do jobs that are actually less dangerous, have fewer long-term health consequences, et cetera, and pay really well. And what we did as a nation is we said, coal miners, fuck you. So you're out of a job. That's the way business goes. We're already paying for them because we're giving them federal assistance, unemployment benefits, food stamps, et cetera. Why not take that money and put it into retraining for an industry that's hurting for people? So yeah, the thing about economics is it's as one thing pulls one way, things come in and fill in vacuums oftentimes. Except for manufacturing jobs, in which those things just generally go to countries where we pay people less money and don't give them any benefits, because it makes manufacturing cheaper. All right, we are going to talk about what is on the schedule for next week.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday break.
What?
Only Monday.
Yeah, only Monday. I forget what's on the schedule. Look at the schedule, the revised posted schedule. And I don't actually remember what's on the schedule for Monday. It's taken me a little while to get your test back to you. I hope to get them back to you on Monday, because I will have finished grading for other things.